The old cabin sat at the edge of Thomas Whitmore's sprawling ranch like a forgotten memory, its weathered boards gray with age and neglect. For 15 years he'd ridden past it without giving it much thought. Just another structure on the 12,000 acres he'd inherited from his father. But on a bitter February morning, when smoke curled from its crooked chimney, Thomas pulled his horse to a stop and stared. He'd purchased this section of land 5 years ago from a developer who'd gone bankrupt, never bothering to check if anyone lived in the ramshackle dwelling that came with it. The property deed listed it as abandoned. Yet there it was, undeniable proof of life in the thin ribbon of smoke rising into the pale winter sky. Thomas dismounted and approached cautiously. The cabin looked ready to collapse, its porch sagging dangerously, windows patched with cardboard and tape. He knocked, and the door opened to reveal a small Chinese woman, perhaps in her 70s, with kind eyes that held both wariness and dignity. Behind her, he glimpsed a space heated by a wood stove, furnished with salvaged items and illuminated by candles. "I'm Thomas Whitmore," he said, removing his hat. "I own this land." "I didn't know anyone was living here," the woman bowed slightly. "I am Lynn. I'm sorry for trespassing. I will leave." Her English was heavily accented but clear. Thomas held up his hand, something in her quiet grace stopping him from saying what he'd come to say. "How long have you been here?" 7 years, she replied simply. "My husband and I came here when we had nowhere else to go. He died 3 years ago. I stayed because I had no money, no family, nowhere to go." Thomas felt something shift in his chest. 7 years she'd survived in this death trap of a cabin, invisible to everyone, including him. "May I come in?" Lynn hesitated, then stepped aside. The interior was immaculate despite its poverty. Vegetables grew in pots near the window. Books lined a makeshift shelf, their spines cracked and worn. A small photograph showed Lynn and a man, both younger, both smiling, standing in front of what looked like a restaurant. "We had a restaurant in San Francisco," Lynn said, following his gaze. "We worked 40 years, saved everything. Then my husband got sick, cancer, the treatment took everything. The restaurant, our savings, our home. A friend knew about this empty cabin. We came here to die together, but I lived." Thomas sat heavily in the only chair, gesturing for her to take the bed. His mind raced with shame and something deeper, something that felt like recognition. His own father had built the Whitmore Ranch from nothing, working himself into an early grave to leave Thomas with wealth and opportunity. Yet what had Thomas done with it? He'd grown the business, sure, but he'd grown cold too, focused only on profit margins and expansion, forgetting the human element that had driven his father's generosity. "Why didn't you ask for help?" he asked quietly. Lynn smiled sadly. "Pride is a terrible companion in poverty, and who would help an old Chinese woman with nothing to offer? I learned to be invisible. It is safer that way." His housekeeper Maria welcomed her with warm efficiency, showing her to one of the guest rooms while Thomas made phone calls. By evening, he'd arranged everything. The cabin would be demolished. In its place, he'd build a small, proper house where Lynn could live with dignity. But more than that, he offered her a job managing the ranch's new community outreach program, something he'd been thinking about for years but never acted on. "I don't understand," Lynn said over dinner, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Why would you do this for me?" Thomas looked at this woman who'd survived with such grace what would have broken most people. "My father used to say that wealth isn't measured by what you keep, but by what you give when it costs you something. I've forgotten that." "You reminded me." In the months that followed, Lynn transformed the ranch's relationship with the surrounding community. She organized food drives, created a scholarship fund for immigrant children, and started a program helping elderly people find affordable housing. The small house Thomas built for her became a gathering place, a beacon of hope. Thomas often visited her there, drinking tea and listening to her stories. She taught him Mandarin phrases. He taught her to ride horses. Their friendship became the bedrock of his renewed purpose, proof that sometimes the greatest gifts come not from what we plan, but from what we stumble upon when we finally open our eyes. On the anniversary of their meeting, Lynn planted a garden where the old cabin had stood, flowers blooming in neat rows. "From death, life," she said simply, and Thomas understood. Sometimes we must tear down what's broken to build something beautiful. Sometimes the poorest among us are the richest in spirit. And sometimes redemption comes not from grand gestures but from simply choosing to see.